In the 1960s, grandmothers made secret blue plate dinners that mattered. Their secret wasn't buying fancy ingredients. They built complete meals for under $2. They piled Salisbury steak with gravy and liver with onions onto affordable plates that satisfied whole families. But gradually, these beloved dinners disappeared. Let's rediscover these 30 forgotten blue plates before the last generation forgets them completely. Salisbury steak blue plate was the 1960s diner classic that turned ground beef into restaurant-quality dinner when families wanted something special without spending much. The plate included thick Salisbury steak smothered in rich mushroom gravy, creamy mashed potatoes, buttered green beans, a dinner roll with butter, and sometimes a small side salad. Waitresses delivered it on oval platters, still sizzling hot from the kitchen. The steak was tender, juicy, and seasoned with onions, Worcestershire sauce, and black pepper. Gravy was thick, savory, and pooled into the mashed potatoes. Cost around $1.50 in the 1960s. Affordable for working families eating out once a week. This blue plate disappeared when fast food burgers replaced sit-down dinners and diners closed across America. Modern restaurants don't serve Salisbury steak anymore because it feels outdated and labor-intensive. But in the 1960s, this was the meal that made you feel like you were dining somewhere fancy, even though you were sitting at a Formica counter in a small-town diner where everyone knew your name. Chicken fried steak blue plate was the 1960s diner favorite that combined Southern comfort with affordable portions when families craved something hearty and filling. The plate included breaded cube steak, fried until golden and crispy, smothered in thick white country gravy, served with mashed potatoes, coleslaw, buttered corn, and fluffy biscuits on the side. The steak was pounded thin, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried in hot oil until the coating turned crunchy and the meat stayed tender inside. Gravy was made from pan drippings, flour, milk, and black pepper. Cost around $1.75 in the 1960s, a splurge meal for special occasions. This disappeared when health trends turned people away from fried foods and heavy gravy. Modern chains simplified menus and dropped labor-intensive dishes like chicken fried steak that required skill and time. But in the 1960s, this blue plate was the ultimate comfort food that satisfied hungry workers, truck drivers, and families celebrating payday at their neighborhood diner, where portions were generous and seconds were always offered. Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. Liver and onions blue plate was the 1960s diner staple that turned cheap organ meat into respectable dinner when families needed protein without spending much money. The plate included thin sliced beef or calf liver pan fried until just cooked through. Topped with caramelized onions, served with mashed potatoes, bacon strips, buttered carrots, and white bread with butter. The liver was dredged in flour and fried quickly so it stayed tender and slightly pink inside instead of tough and gray. Onions were cooked low and slow until sweet and golden. Cost around $1.25 in the 1960s, one of the cheapest blue plates available. This disappeared when younger generations refused to eat organ meat, and diners stopped ordering it completely. Modern Americans associate liver with poverty food and old-fashioned cooking their grandparents ate. But in the 1960s, liver and onions was a legitimate dinner choice ordered by construction workers, salesmen, and elderly regulars who appreciated affordable protein that stuck to your ribs and kept you full for hours afterward. Before we continue, Ham steak with pineapple was the 1960s diner special that combined savory meat with sweet fruit when customers wanted something different from the usual beef and chicken. The plate included thick-cut ham steak, grilled until edges caramelized, topped with grilled pineapple rings and maraschino cherries, served with sweet potato casserole, green beans, and a dinner roll. The ham was salty and smoky. Pineapple added sweetness that cut through the salt. Cost around $1.60 in the 1960s, a mid-priced option that felt tropical and exotic. This disappeared when Hawaiian-style food became trendy, then outdated, and diners simplified menus to focus on burgers and sandwiches instead of full dinner plates. Modern restaurants rarely serve ham steak because customers prefer bacon or pulled pork instead. But in the 1960s, ham steak with pineapple was the plate you ordered when you wanted to feel adventurous and fancy without leaving your small-town diner where the jukebox played Elvis and the coffee was always fresh and hot. Hot turkey sandwich was the 1960s diner comfort meal that turned leftover Thanksgiving into everyday dinner when customers wanted something warm and satisfying. The plate included thick slices of roasted turkey piled on white bread, smothered in turkey gravy, served with mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and stuffing on the side. The turkey was moist and tender. Gravy was rich and savory. Everything soaked into the bread until soft and falling apart. Cost around $1.40 in the 1960s. Affordable comfort that felt like holiday dinner any day of the week. This disappeared when fast food sandwiches replaced sit-down meals and diners stopped roasting whole turkeys daily. Modern restaurants serve cold turkey sandwiches instead of hot open-faced versions smothered in gravy. But in the 1960s, hot turkey sandwich was the ultimate comfort plate ordered by lonely travelers, tired workers, and regulars who wanted something that tasted like home cooking without having to cook it themselves at the end of a long, exhausting day. These 5 blue plates defined 1960s diner culture. Affordable, filling, and comforting. Salisbury steak, chicken fried steak, liver and onions, ham with pineapple, and hot turkey sandwich fed working America. Every plate cost under $2 and vanished when diners closed. The next 5 show even more forgotten classics. Beef stroganoff was the 1960s diner special that brought fancy Russian cuisine to small-town America when customers wanted something sophisticated and different. The plate included tender beef strips in creamy mushroom sauce served over egg noodles with a side salad, green beans, and a dinner roll. The beef was seared quickly, then simmered in sour cream sauce with mushrooms and onions until rich and velvety. Cost around $1.85 in the 1960s, one of the pricier blue plates because beef and sour cream were expensive. This disappeared when diners simplified menus and dropped complex dishes that required multiple steps and ingredients. Modern restaurants rarely serve stroganoff because it feels outdated and heavy compared to lighter pasta dishes customers prefer now. But in the 1960s, ordering beef stroganoff at your local diner made you feel worldly and cultured, like you were dining in a fancy European restaurant instead of sitting at a vinyl booth under fluorescent lights, where the waitress called you hon and knew exactly how you liked your coffee without asking. Swiss steak was the 1960s diner classic that turned tough round steak into tender dinner when families needed affordable beef that didn't break the budget. The plate included round steak pounded thin, braised in tomato vegetable gravy until fork tender, served with mashed potatoes, buttered carrots, coleslaw, and white bread. The steak was dredged in flour, browned, then simmered for hours in tomato sauce with onions, celery, and bell peppers. Gravy was thick and tangy. cost around $1.55 in the 1960s, affordable because round steak was cheaper than prime cuts. This disappeared when slow-braised dishes became too labor-intensive for modern fast-paced kitchens, and customers stopped ordering anything that took hours to prepare. Swiss steak required starting early in the morning to be ready for lunch rush. But in the 1960s, this blue plate was the definition of home-style cooking, tender, flavorful, and satisfying in a way that made customers feel like they were eating Sunday dinner at Grandma's house instead of a busy roadside diner. Pork chops with applesauce was the 1960s diner standard that paired savory meat with sweet fruit when customers wanted classic American comfort food. The plate included thick-cut pork chops pan-fried until golden, served with homemade applesauce, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a dinner roll. The chops were seasoned with salt, pepper, and sage, then fried in butter until juicy inside and crispy outside. Applesauce was chunky and cinnamon-spiced. Cost around $1.50 in the 1960s, affordable protein that felt substantial. This disappeared when pork got leaner and drier, and health concerns about fat made people avoid fried pork chops completely. Modern restaurants serve grilled pork tenderloin instead of bone-in chops fried in butter. But in the 1960s, pork chops with applesauce was the plate that reminded customers of childhood dinners at home, where mothers cooked simple food that tasted good and filled you up without pretending to be anything fancier than honest working-class cooking done right. Breaded veal cutlet was the 1960s diner luxury that brought Italian-style schnitzel to American counters when customers wanted something special and celebratory. The plate included thin veal cutlet, breaded and fried until golden and crispy, served with spaghetti and tomato sauce, Italian green beans, garlic bread, and Parmesan cheese. The veal was pounded paper-thin, dredged in flour, egg, and breadcrumbs, then fried in hot oil until the coating shattered when you cut into it. Cost around $1.95 in the 1960s, the most expensive blue plate, because veal was pricey and considered fancy. This disappeared when veal became controversial due to animal welfare concerns and Americans stopped eating it altogether. Modern diners don't serve breaded veal cutlet anymore because younger customers refuse to order it and older customers can't find it anywhere. But in the 1960s, this was the plate you ordered on your anniversary or birthday when you wanted to treat yourself to something special without going to an expensive restaurant downtown. Pot roast was the 1960s diner Sunday special that brought home cooking to restaurant counters when families wanted traditional meals without doing the work themselves. The plate included slow-roasted beef chuck with carrots and potatoes cooked in the same pan, served with dinner roll, green beans, and sometimes horseradish sauce on the side. The beef was seared, then braised for hours until falling apart tender. Vegetables soaked up beef flavor and became sweet and soft. Cost around $1.65 in the 1960s, affordable comfort that tasted like Grandma's kitchen. This disappeared when slow cooking became impractical for fast-paced modern restaurants and customers wanted meals in minutes instead of hours. Pot roast required starting early morning to be ready for dinner rush. But in the 1960s, pot roast blue plate was Sunday tradition. The meal families ordered after church when mothers didn't want to cook, but everyone still wanted that homemade feeling that made Sundays special and different from every other day of the busy, exhausting week. These 10 blue plates showcased 1960s diner cooking at its finest: stroganoff, Swiss steak, pork chops, veal cutlet, and pot roast. Every plate was affordable, filling, and tasted like home. They vanished when diners closed and fast food replaced sit-down meals. The next plates proved diner food was unforgettable. Country fried ham steak was the 1960s diner breakfast for dinner favorite that brought Southern tradition to blue plate menus when customers wanted salty, savory comfort food that reminded them of home. The blue plate included thick ham steak dredged in seasoned flour and pan-fried until edges crisped and turned golden brown, served with red-eye gravy made from ham drippings and strong black coffee, creamy stone ground grits, fried apples cooked in butter and cinnamon, slow-cooked collard greens, with bacon, and hot cornbread with melted butter on the side. The ham was already cured and intensely salty, so frying added crispy texture without needing much additional seasoning. Red-eye gravy was thin, dark, slightly bitter from the coffee, and perfect for soaking cornbread or pouring over grits. Cost around $1.50 in the 1960s, affordable Southern plate that felt authentic and substantial. This disappeared when Southern cooking became regional instead of national, and diners outside the South stopped serving grits and red-eye gravy because customers didn't understand them. Modern customers don't know what red-eye gravy is and won't order ham steak when bacon and sausage are available on breakfast menus. But in the 1960s, country fried ham steak was the plate that reminded transplanted Southerners of home cooking they missed desperately and introduced curious Northerners to bold, salty, coffee-flavored Southern traditions they'd never experienced before in small-town diners where regional. Specialties crossed state lines and became beloved American classics everyone could enjoy together, regardless of where they came from originally. Beef and noodle bake was the 1960s diner casserole that stretched ground beef with egg noodles when customers wanted something hearty, cheesy, and deeply comforting that felt like home cooking. The blue plate included hot casserole of seasoned ground beef, white egg noodles, rich tomato sauce, tangy sour cream, and melted cheddar cheese on top, served with buttery garlic bread, crisp green salad with ranch dressing, and buttered corn on the cob. The casserole was assembled in layers inside a baking dish, cooked egg noodles on the bottom, browned ground beef mixed with Italian seasoned tomato sauce in the middle, thick sour cream spread over that layer, then generous amounts of shredded cheddar cheese melted on top. Everything was baked in the oven until bubbly, golden, and the cheese turned slightly crispy around the edges. Cost around $1.55 in the 1960s, affordable and extremely filling because noodles and cheese stretched expensive ground beef to feed more people. This disappeared when individual plated meals replaced family-style casseroles and customers wanted food that looked elegant and sophisticated instead of scooped from a communal pan. Modern diners don't serve casseroles because they seem old-fashioned, unsophisticated, and remind people of church potlucks instead of restaurant dining. But in the 1960s, beef and noodle bake was pure comfort, hot, cheesy, satisfying food that tasted exactly like someone's mother made it with love in a home kitchen instead of a busy commercial diner where speed usually mattered more than heart and soul. Cream-chipped beef was the 1960s diner staple that military families called SOS when they wanted cheap, filling comfort food that reminded them of mess hall meals. The blue plate included dried chipped beef in thick white cream sauce served over toast points or biscuits, with hash browns, fried eggs, and sometimes a side of sliced tomatoes. The dried beef was torn into pieces and simmered in white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk until creamy and thick. The beef was extremely salty from the curing process, so no additional salt was needed. Cost around $1.35 in the 1960s, one of the cheapest blue plates because dried beef was inexpensive and shelf-stable. This disappeared when younger generations refused to eat dried mystery meat smothered in white sauce that looked unappetizing and tasted too salty for modern palates. Health-conscious customers avoided cream-based dishes completely. Modern diners stopped serving it because nobody under 50 years old would order it. But in the 1960s, creamed chipped beef was comfort food for veterans, military families, and working-class customers who appreciated affordable protein that filled stomachs and reminded them of simpler times. Truck drivers ordered it at 3 a.m. Night shift workers ate it before heading home. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't fancy, but it was hot, filling, cheap, and available 24 hours a day in diners that never closed their doors to hungry customers who needed food and coffee and a friendly face. Stuffed bell peppers was the 1960s diner special that turned simple vegetables into complete meal when customers wanted something different from the usual meat and potatoes offerings. The blue plate included 2 large bell peppers stuffed with seasoned ground beef, rice, onions, and tomato sauce, baked until tender, served with mashed potatoes, buttered corn, dinner roll, and a side salad. The peppers were hollowed out, blanched briefly to soften them, then filled with a mixture of browned ground beef, cooked rice, diced onions, garlic, tomato sauce, and Italian seasoning. They were topped with shredded cheese and baked until the peppers became tender and the filling was hot and bubbly. Cost around $1.50 in the 1960s, affordable and filling because ground beef and rice were cheap ingredients that stretched far. This disappeared when stuffed peppers became too labor-intensive for modern fast-paced kitchens that couldn't spend time hollowing vegetables and assembling individual portions. Customers also stopped ordering dishes that took 20 minutes to prepare when they could get burgers in 5 minutes. But in the 1960s, stuffed bell peppers was the healthy choice that made customers feel virtuous for eating vegetables while still getting plenty of meat and carbs to satisfy hunger. Mothers ordered it thinking it was nutritious for their children. Dieters ordered it believing peppers were lighter than fried foods, even though the filling was just as heavy and caloric as anything else on the menu. Beef short ribs was the 1960s diner luxury that brought fall off the bone-tender meat to blue plate menus when customers wanted something special that felt like Sunday dinner. The blue plate included meaty beef short ribs braised until tender in rich brown gravy served with mashed potatoes, buttered carrots, coleslaw, and a dinner roll with butter. The short ribs were seared until deeply browned, then braised for hours in beef stock, red wine, onions, garlic, and herbs until the meat fell off the bones and the sauce reduced to thick, glossy gravy. Cost around $1.80 in the 1960s, one of the pricier blue plates because short ribs were expensive and required hours of slow cooking. This disappeared when labor costs made slow-braised dishes impractical and customers stopped waiting for meals that took all day to prepare. Modern restaurants serve short ribs only at upscale steakhouses where they cost $25 or more. But in the 1960s, beef short ribs blue plate was affordable luxury. The meal you ordered on payday or special occasions when you wanted to treat yourself without spending a fortune. The meat was so tender it didn't need a knife. The gravy was so rich it made everything taste like celebration. This was the plate that made regular working people feel like kings and queens for an hour while they sat in their neighborhood diner, surrounded by neighbors, friends, and the comforting smell of good food cooked right. These 15 blue plates defined 1960s diner excellence: smothered pork chops, chicken la king, creamed chipped beef, stuffed peppers, and braised short ribs. Every plate cost under $2 and disappeared when diners closed nationwide. Fast food replaced sit-down meals. The final 15 show why we desperately miss diner culture. Fried chicken dinner was the 1960s diner classic that rivaled homemade Sunday chicken when families wanted crispy, juicy perfection without frying it themselves. The blue plate included 3 pieces of golden fried chicken, thigh, breast, creamy mashed potatoes with gravy, coleslaw, buttered corn on the cob, fluffy biscuits with honey butter, and sometimes a side of macaroni salad. The chicken was soaked overnight in buttermilk, dredged in seasoned flour with secret spices, then fried in cast-iron skillets filled with bubbling lard or vegetable shortening until the coating turned deep golden brown and shatteringly crispy while the meat stayed juicy inside. Cost around $1.65 in the 1960s, affordable luxury that fed the whole family. This disappeared when fast food fried chicken chains like KFC took over and diners couldn't compete with mass production and lower prices. Modern sit-down restaurants stopped frying chicken because it was messy, dangerous, and time-consuming compared to grilling or baking. But in the 1960s, diner fried chicken was legendary. Crispy coating that crackled when you bit into it, meat so tender it fell off the bone, and sides so generous you always left with a doggy bag full of leftovers. Families ordered it after church. Workers ordered it on Friday nights. Everyone agreed that diner fried chicken tasted better than anything you could make at home because diners had the perfect hot oil temperature and the secret seasoning blend nobody could quite replicate, no matter how hard they tried. Braised lamb shanks was the 1960s diner specialty that brought Mediterranean flavor to American blue plates when adventurous customers wanted something exotic and different. The blue plate included 1 or 2 lamb shanks braised until falling apart tender in tomato wine sauce with garlic and herbs, served over buttered egg noodles or rice pilaf with roasted root vegetables, dinner roll, and a side of Greek salad with feta cheese and olives. The lamb shanks were seared until browned, then braised for hours in red wine, tomatoes, garlic, rosemary, and thyme until the meat became so tender it slid off the bone. The sauce was rich, aromatic, and deeply flavorful. Cost around $1.90 in the 1960s, the most expensive blue plate because lamb was pricey and considered fancy restaurant food. This disappeared when Americans stopped eating lamb altogether and diners removed it from menus due to lack of demand. Modern customers find lamb too gamey, too expensive, and too unfamiliar compared to beef, chicken, and pork. But in the 1960s, braised lamb shanks was the sophisticated choice ordered by traveled customers who had tasted Mediterranean cuisine and wanted to recreate that experience in their small-town diner. Greek and Italian immigrants ordered it feeling nostalgic for homeland flavors. Food adventurers ordered it to seem worldly and cultured. Everyone agreed it was delicious, impressive, and worth every penny, even though it cost almost $2 when most blue plates were under $1.50. Beef tips and rice was the 1960s diner favorite that turned cheap beef scraps into elegant dinner when customers wanted something that looked fancy but cost very little. The blue plate included tender beef tips in rich brown mushroom gravy served over white rice or egg noodles with buttered green beans, dinner roll, and a side salad with French dressing. The beef tips were cut from less expensive cuts like sirloin tips or stew meat, seared quickly in hot oil, then simmered in beef gravy made from pan drippings, flour, beef stock, Worcestershire sauce, and sliced mushrooms until the meat became fork tender. The gravy was thick, savory, and perfect for soaking into rice. Cost around $1.55 in the 1960s, affordable because beef tips used cheaper cuts that became tender through slow simmering. This disappeared when faster cooking dishes replaced anything that required simmering, and diners simplified menus to speed up service. Modern restaurants serve stir-fried beef instead of braised beef tips because customers want meals in minutes, not hours. But in the 1960s, beef tips and rice was the plate that made budget-conscious customers feel like they were eating expensive steak dinner even though it was made from trimmings and lesser cuts that butchers sold cheap. The presentation was elegant. The flavor was rich. The price was right. Everything about this blue plate made working people feel fancy and appreciated and special during an era when blue-collar jobs still paid living wages. Hot roast beef sandwich was the 1960s diner comfort classic that piled tender beef on white bread and drowned it in gravy when customers wanted hearty, messy, satisfying food. The blue plate included thick slices of roast beef on white bread, completely smothered in rich beef gravy, served with mashed potatoes also covered in gravy, coleslaw, and sometimes French fries or onion rings on the side. The roast beef was slow roasted until medium rare, sliced thin, then reheated in beef-o just before assembling the sandwich. The bread quickly soaked up gravy and became soft and falling apart. You ate it with a fork and knife, not your hands. Cost around $1.60 in the 1960s, affordable and filling comfort food. This disappeared when diners stopped roasting whole beef roasts daily because it was expensive and wasteful if beef didn't sell quickly. Modern restaurants serve cold roast beef sandwiches instead of hot open-faced versions because they're faster and less messy. But in the 1960s, hot roast beef sandwich was pure comfort, warm, sloppy, satisfying food that required multiple napkins and left you feeling completely full and content. Lonely travelers ordered it at highway diners. Factory workers ordered it during lunch breaks. Late-night customers ordered it at 2 a.m. after bars closed. It was the ultimate stick-to-your-ribs meal that reminded people that food could be simple, honest, delicious, and deeply comforting without trying to be anything more than exactly what it was: good beef, good gravy, good bread. Turkey croquettes was the 1960s diner clever way to use leftover turkey when customers wanted something crispy, golden, and completely different from plain roasted bird that transformed yesterday's meal into something exciting and new. The blue plate included 2 or 3 large oval-shaped croquettes made from finely ground turkey, breadcrumbs, eggs, and seasonings, breaded carefully and deep-fried until golden brown and shatteringly crispy. Served with rich turkey gravy that you poured over everything, creamy mashed potatoes, sweet tart cranberry sauce, buttered green peas, and a soft dinner roll with butter on the side. The croquettes were made by mixing finely chopped cooked turkey meat with thick chamois sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, along with diced celery, minced onions, dried sage, thyme, salt, and white pepper. This mixture was chilled until firm enough to handle, then formed into oval logs about 3 inches long, coated in flour, dipped in beaten eggs, rolled in fine breadcrumbs, then chilled again before frying. They were deep-fried in hot oil until the coating turned deep golden brown and incredibly crispy, while the inside stayed smooth, creamy, and hot. When you bit through the coating, you heard a satisfying crunch before reaching the smooth, creamy, savory turkey mixture inside that tasted rich, comforting, and completely different from plain turkey slice. The bechamel sauce made the interior impossibly creamy and luxurious, almost like a savory custard studded with tender turkey pieces. Cost around $1.45 in the 1960s, affordable way to stretch expensive turkey into multiple meals and make leftovers feel special instead of boring. This disappeared almost completely when deep frying fell dramatically out of favor during health trends and customers stopped ordering anything that required the labor-intensive process of forming, breading, chilling, and frying individual portions. Modern restaurants don't serve croquettes because they're far too labor-intensive, require advanced preparation, need skilled frying technique, and seem hopelessly old-fashioned and outdated for contemporary tastes that prefer grilled, roasted, or simply prepared foods. Making proper croquettes required making bechamel sauce from scratch, chopping turkey finely by hand, forming delicate shapes that wouldn't fall apart during frying, breading carefully in 3 stages, chilling to set the shape, then frying at precisely the right temperature to cook through, without burning the coating. But in the 1960s, turkey croquettes was the clever cook's brilliant answer to leftovers, transforming yesterday's holiday meal into today's crispy, golden special that customers ordered happily and enthusiastically because it felt new, exciting, and different even though it was just recycled turkey. Dressed up beautifully in crispy breadcrumbs and served with all the traditional Thanksgiving trimmings that made it feel like celebration food any day of the year instead of boring leftovers. These 20 blue plates prove 1960s diners mastered comfort food: fried chicken, braised lamb, beef tips, hot roast beef, and turkey croquettes. Every plate cost under $2 and vanished when fast food won. Sit-down dinners disappeared. The final 10 show the blue plates we miss most desperately today. Breaded pork tenderloin was the 1960s Midwestern diner specialty that turned thin pounded pork into massive sandwich when customers wanted something giant, crispy, and completely ridiculous that hung off the edges of the plate like edible comedy. The blue plate included a pork tenderloin pounded paper, thin until it was 3 times the size of the bun, breaded in seasoned flour and cracker crumbs, deep-fried until golden and shatteringly crispy, then served on a small hamburger bun that barely covered a quarter of the enormous meat, with French fries piled high, creamy coleslaw, dill pickle slices, raw onion rings, yellow mustard, and ketchup on the side for customers to build their sandwich however they wanted. The pork was pounded with a meat mallet until it was almost translucent and the size of a dinner plate or larger, dredged in seasoned flour, dipped in beaten eggs, then coated in finely crushed saltine crackers mixed with black pepper, garlic powder, paprika, and salt. It was deep-fried in hot vegetable oil until the coating turned deep golden brown and incredibly crispy, while the thin meat inside cooked through in just minutes, staying tender and juicy. The result was a ridiculously oversized tenderloin that was mostly crispy breading with a thin layer of pork inside, served on a tiny bun that made the whole presentation look comical, excessive, and Instagram-worthy decades before Instagram existed. Cost around $1.60 in the 1960s, mid-priced blue plate that became famous throughout Indiana, Iowa, Illinois, and the entire Midwest, where small-town diners competed fiercely to see who could serve the biggest, crispiest, most outrageous tenderloin that would bring customers driving from 3 counties away. This disappeared when health-conscious customers stopped ordering deep-fried pork cutlets the size of hubcaps that contained probably 1,000 calories and enough fat to clog arteries just from looking at them, and when restaurants simplified menus to focus on burgers and grilled sandwiches that were easier to handle, less messy to eat, and didn't require special equipment or skilled frying technique. The breaded pork tenderloin required industrial-sized deep fryers, lots of expensive oil that needed changing frequently, and careful frying technique to prevent burning the delicate cracker coating before the meat cooked through completely. Modern restaurants outside the Midwest don't serve it because customers don't understand the regional appeal of a sandwich where the meat is literally 10 times bigger than the bun and you absolutely need a fork and knife to eat it properly without making a complete mess. But in the 1960s, breaded pork tenderloin was a point of fierce regional pride and culinary identity. The bigger the better, the crispier the better, the more ridiculous and excessive the presentation the better. Ham and lima beans was the 1960s diner comfort classic that combined salty smoked ham with creamy butter beans when customers wanted simple, honest, unpretentious food that tasted like Depression-era survival cooking, elevated slightly into something respectable and restaurant-worthy. The blue plate included large lima beans that had been slow-cooked for hours with ham hocks or chunks of diced ham until tender, creamy, and falling apart, served with hot cornbread dripping with melted butter, tangy coleslaw, thick slices of fresh tomatoes sprinkled with salt and pepper. Pickled beets that added bright color and vinegar tang, and sometimes fried okra or slow-cooked collard greens with bacon on the side for customers who wanted even more southern comfort vegetables. The lima beans were soaked overnight in cold water to soften them and reduce cooking time, then simmered for 3 or 4 hours in a big pot with meaty ham bones, diced onions, minced garlic, black pepper, and sometimes a bay leaf until the beans became incredibly soft and creamy and the ham fell off the bones into tender, salty shreds, and the cooking liquid reduced into thick, rich pot liquor that tasted intensely of pork, smoke, and deep comfort. Some diners added a little brown sugar or dark molasses to balance the intense saltiness of the cured ham and create sweet, savory complexity. Others added hot sauce or cayenne pepper for heat and brightness. The ham was smoky, intensely salty, and fell apart into tender shreds that mixed throughout the beans. Others added hot sauce or cayenne pepper for heat and brightness. The ham was smoky, intensely salty, and fell apart into tender shreds that mixed throughout the beans. The beans themselves were buttery, starchy, creamy, and absorbed all the complex ham flavor during the long, slow cooking process that couldn't be rushed or replicated in modern, fast-paced kitchens. Cost around $1.40 in the 1960s, one of the cheaper blue plates available on diner menus because dried lima beans and leftover ham hocks were among the most inexpensive ingredients you could possibly buy at grocery stores or butcher shops. This disappeared completely when younger generations rejected lima beans with intense prejudice and hatred, associating them forever with terrible school cafeteria food and childhood punishment when parents forced them to sit at the dinner table until they finished eating their cold, mushy vegetables. Health trends during the 1980s and 1990s also turned people away from salty cured ham and starchy beans during the height of low-carb diet fads when carbohydrates became vilified. Corned beef and cabbage was the 1960s diner Irish-American tradition that became beloved American classic when customers wanted hearty, honest, unpretentious food that tasted like celebration, heritage, and tradition without costing a fortune or requiring fancy ingredients. The blue plate included thick slices of incredibly tender corned beef brisket that had been brined and simmered for hours, boiled cabbage wedges that were soft but not mushy, boiled red potatoes with skins still on, boiled carrots cut into chunks, and sometimes boiled turnips or parsnips for customers who wanted even more root vegetables, all served together on one enormous platter with spicy whole-grain mustard, fiery prepared horseradish sauce that cleared sinuses instantly, thick slices of dark rye bread with softened butter, and a large dill pickle spear on the side. The corned beef was brined for 5 to 7 days in a mixture of salt, sugar, pink curing salt, and pickling spices including mustard seeds, coriander, peppercorns, bay leaves, and cloves, then rinsed thoroughly and simmered gently in fresh water for 3 to 4 hours until the meat became fork, tender and falling apart. The vegetables were added to the same pot during the last 30 minutes of cooking, so they absorbed all the salty, spiced, complex flavor from the brined meat and cooking liquid. Everything was served plain, simple, and completely unpretentious. No fancy sauces, no artistic garnishes, no attempts at sophistication. Just honest boiled food piled high on a plate with strong mustard and fiery horseradish to cut through the richness and fat. Cost around $1.65 in the 1960s, mid-priced blue plate that felt special, festive, and celebratory, even though it was literally just boiled meat and boiled vegetables served together without any culinary technique beyond patient simmering. This disappeared from regular diner menus when boiled food became deeply unfashionable during the 1980s, and customers started demanding grilled, roasted, sauteed, or stir-fried dishes instead of everything cooked together in one big pot of boiling water like peasant food from centuries past. Health-conscious diners also began avoiding corned beef completely because it was extremely high in sodium from the brining process and high in saturated fat from the brisket cut. Modern restaurants only serve corned beef and cabbage during the week surrounding St. Patrick's Day in March, treating it as an annual novelty and ethnic curiosity instead of a legitimate regular menu item that customers might actually want to order throughout the entire year. Chicken and Dumplings was the 1960s diner soul food classic that turned stewed chicken pieces into deeply comforting meal when customers wanted something warm, soft, soothing, and profoundly satisfying that felt exactly like eating dinner in grandmother's kitchen on a cold winter Sunday afternoon. The blue plate included tender chicken pieces that had been simmered until falling off the bones, swimming in thick, rich, creamy chicken gravy studded with fluffy dumplings that had soaked up all the savory chicken flavor, served with a mountain of creamy mashed potatoes, buttered green beans, cooked until very soft, tangy coleslaw for contrast, and a large buttermilk biscuit with melted butter and honey on the side. The chicken was an entire bird cut into 8 pieces, simmered gently in water or chicken stock with diced onions, chopped celery, sliced carrots, bay leaves, thyme, and black peppercorns until the meat became incredibly tender and started falling off the bones. Then the broth was strained and thickened with a roux made from butter and flour to create thick, velvety, luxurious gravy that coated everything. Dumplings were made from the simplest possible dough, all-purpose flour, baking powder, salt, milk, and melted butter, mixed just until combined, then dropped by heaping spoonfuls directly into the simmering gravy, where they puffed up dramatically and cooked through, becoming fluffy and tender on the inside while absorbing intense chicken flavor from the gravy. The finished dish was essentially chicken stew with biscuit-like dumplings floating throughout, creating multiple textures and temperatures in every bite. Cost around $1.55 in the 1960s, affordable comfort food that stretched one whole chicken to feed 6 or 8 people because the dumplings added substantial bulk and filling carbohydrates. This disappeared from most diner menus when slow-cooked dishes became completely impractical for fast-paced modern kitchens, where customers expected meals delivered within 10 minutes of ordering, and restaurants couldn't justify tying up stove space for hours to simmer chicken. Making proper chicken and dumplings from scratch required simmering chicken for at least 60 to 90 minutes, then making gravy, then cooking dumplings, which meant total active and passive preparation time of 2.5 to 3 hours from start to finish, absolutely impossible in modern restaurant operations. Shepherd's pie was the 1960s diner British import that turned leftover ground meat into complete, satisfying meal when customers wanted something hearty, warming, comforting, and topped with a thick, creamy layer of buttery mashed potatoes that got crispy and golden under the broiler. The blue plate included seasoned ground lamb or ground beef that had been cooked with onions, carrots, peas, and rich brown gravy until thick and savory, topped with a generous layer of creamy mashed potatoes mixed with butter, cream, and sometimes shredded cheddar cheese, then run under a hot broiler until the potatoes developed beautiful golden brown peaks and slightly crispy edges, served with a soft dinner roll, a simple side salad with ranch or Thousand Island dressing, and sometimes pickled beets or cottage cheese on the side for customers who wanted additional sides. The meat filling was made by browning ground lamb or beef with finely diced onions and minced garlic, then simmering with beef stock, Worcestershire sauce, tomato paste, dried thyme, and frozen mixed vegetables, including carrots, peas, and corn, until the mixture became thick, savory, and deeply flavorful. This mixture was spread evenly in a casserole dish or individual serving crocks, topped with mashed potatoes that had been whipped with butter, heavy cream, salt, and white pepper until light and fluffy. Then the surface was roughed up with a fork to create texture, and finally run under a screaming hot broiler until the potatoes developed gorgeous golden brown color and crispy bits. The result was a hearty, filling casserole that was savory and comforting, with multiple contrasting textures, creamy potatoes on top, rich meaty filling underneath, and crispy potato peaks scattered across the surface. These 5 blue plates showcased diner ingenuity: breaded pork tenderloin, ham and lima beans, corned beef and cabbage, chicken and dumplings, and shepherd's pie. Every plate cost under $2 and disappeared when fast food dominated. Regional specialties vanished. Home-style cooking died. The final 5 prove why we desperately miss 1960s diner culture. Swedish meatballs was the 1960s diner Scandinavian specialty that brought sophisticated European flavors to humble American blue plates when customers wanted something different, exotic, worldly, and creamy that made them feel cultured and adventurous without leaving their small-town neighborhood. The blue plate included tender beef and pork meatballs swimming in rich velvety cream gravy, delicately flavored with nutmeg and allspice, served over buttered egg noodles or creamy mashed potatoes, with bright red lingonberry sauce on the side, pickled cucumbers for tangy crunch, thick slices of dark rye bread with softened butter, and sometimes a side of buttered carrots or green beans for customers who wanted vegetables, because they require 2 types of ground meat: special imported spices, lingonberry preserves that must be ordered specially, and cream gravy that takes time and skill to make properly without curdling or breaking. But in the 1960s, Swedish meatballs was the sophisticated, worldly choice ordered by customers who wanted to feel cultured and adventurous and well-traveled even though they'd never left their home state. Meatloaf was the 1960s diner absolute classic that turned humble ground beef into supremely satisfying dinner when customers wanted honest, unpretentious, deeply comforting food that tasted exactly like home cooking without any restaurant pretension or culinary sophistication. The blue plate included a thick slice of tender, juicy meatloaf topped with tangy tomato glaze or sweet ketchup topping, served with a mountain of creamy mashed potatoes covered in rich brown gravy, buttered sweet corn kernels, tangy coleslaw for contrast, a soft dinner roll with butter, and sometimes creamy macaroni and cheese or buttered green beans on the side for customers who wanted even more comfort food. The meatloaf was made from ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs or crushed saltine crackers that had been soaked in milk, beaten eggs as binder, finely diced onions, and sometimes diced bell peppers for flavor and moisture, minced garlic, Worcestershire sauce for umami depth, salt, black pepper, and sometimes dried herbs like thyme or parsley. The mixture was formed into a loaf shape, placed in a loaf pan or shaped freeform on a baking sheet, topped generously with ketchup that had been mixed with brown sugar and cider vinegar to create sweet, tangy glaze, then baked slowly until the outside developed a caramelized crust and the inside stayed moist and tender and juicy. Each slice revealed the perfect texture of home-cooked comfort. Not too dense and compact, not too loose and crumbly, just right and held together perfectly. Cost around $1.45 in the 1960s, one of the most affordable blue plates on any diner menu because ground beef was cheap and meatloaf stretched it incredibly far with breadcrumbs, eggs, and vegetable fillers. This never completely disappeared from diner menus, but became significantly less popular when customers started viewing traditional meatloaf as boring, old-fashioned, unsophisticated cafeteria food that reminded them of institutional cooking and school lunches rather than restaurant-quality dining. Experiences. Modern upscale restaurants serve reimagined gourmet meatloaf made with expensive ground veal, fresh herbs, artisanal glazes, and fancy presentation. But simple, honest, unpretentious diner meatloaf vanished along with most of the small-town diners that served it daily. But in the 1960s, meatloaf was the quintessential definition of American comfort food, the meal that defined home cooking, family dinners gathered around the table, and the simple pleasure of eating good food that didn't try to be anything more than honest, filling, deeply satisfying sustenance. That made you feel cared for and content. Truckers ordered it every time. Traveling salesmen ordered it faithfully. Frankfurters and Beans was the 1960s diner simple pleasure that turned ordinary hot dogs into complete, satisfying meal when customers wanted something fast, cheap, filling, and completely unpretentious that reminded them of childhood summers and backyard cookouts. The blue plate included 4 or 5 plump hot dogs that had been sliced into thick chunks and mixed with sweet baked beans in thick tomato sauce, served with creamy coleslaw, a generous pile of crispy French fries or crunchy potato chips, crunchy dill pickle spears, a soft dinner roll or hot dog, bun with butter, and sometimes creamy macaroni salad or potato salad on the side for customers who wanted even more picnic-style sides. The hot dogs were either boiled until plump and juicy or grilled until slightly charred and smoky, then cut into bite-sized pieces and stirred into canned baked beans that had been significantly improved and doctored with brown sugar, dark molasses, yellow mustard, ketchup, diced onions, and crispy bacon pieces to make them taste homemade instead of straight from the can. Everything was heated together slowly until the hot dogs were heated through completely and the beans became thick, bubbly, and intensely flavorful. The combination was sweet from the molasses and brown sugar, savory from the hot dogs and bacon, smoky from grilling, and completely unpretentious, essentially kid food that adults ordered without any shame or embarrassment because it tasted genuinely good and reminded them of happy summer memories, family cookouts, and simpler childhood times. Cost around $1.30 in the 1960s, one of the absolute cheapest blue plates available on any diner menu. Chili Mac was the 1960s diner brilliant fusion that combined 2 beloved American comfort foods into one satisfying plate when customers wanted something hearty, spicy, filling, and the blue plate included rich, thick chili con carne made with ground beef and kidney beans served generously over a bed of tender elbow macaroni, topped with a mountain of shredded sharp cheddar cheese, diced raw onions for crunch and sharpness, and sometimes a dollop of cool sour cream to balance. The heat, served with a basket of saltine crackers, warm cornbread or buttery garlic bread, tangy coleslaw for contrast, and a small dish of sliced jalapenos for customers who wanted additional heat and spice. Depth and complexity, cooked slowly until thick, rich, and intensely flavorful. Macaroni was cooked separately in boiling salted water, then drained thoroughly. To serve, a generous scoop of hot macaroni was placed on the plate, then topped immediately with piping hot chili and covered completely with shredded cheese that melted instantly from the heat. Customers mixed everything together enthusiastically, creating a spicy, cheesy, satisfying mess that combined multiple textures and temperatures in every bite. Cost around $1. Corned beef hash was the 1960s diner breakfast for dinner favorite that turned canned meat into supremely satisfying meal when customers wanted something salty, crispy, hearty, and topped with perfectly fried eggs with gloriously runny yolks. The blue plate included corned beef hash pan fried in butter or bacon grease until deeply crispy and golden brown on the bottom, topped with 2 large fried eggs cooked sunny side up with runny yolks that would break and flow throughout the hash, served with crispy hash browns or home fries. The hash was made either from canned corned beef hash, usually Hormel brand, mixed with additional diced potatoes, diced onions, black pepper, and seasonings, or made completely from scratch using leftover corned beef brisket that had been finely chopped and mixed with cooked potatoes and onions. The mixture was pressed firmly into a hot cast-iron skillet with melted butter or bacon grease, then left completely alone without stirring to develop a thick, golden brown, incredibly crispy crust on the bottom before carefully flipping sections to brown the other side. Some diners formed it into a large patty. Others left it loose and crispy. The eggs were fried separately in butter until the whites set completely firm and the yolks stayed liquid and runny, then placed carefully on top of the hash so the runny yolks would mix throughout when customers cut into them. Cost around $1.35 in the 1960s, cheap, incredibly filling, and available all day and night in 24-hour diners that never closed. This never completely disappeared, but became relegated almost exclusively to breakfast menus instead of being considered legitimate dinner food. These 30 forgotten blue plate specials prove that 1960s diners served real food that fed America better than any fast food chain ever could, came with generous sides, and was made from scratch in kitchens where cooks actually cared about feeding people. It made America feel like home when every town had a place where everybody knew